Welcome to the Breakfast Leadership Show, where we interview global thought leaders on business, leadership, and life. Here's your host, keynote speaker, best-selling author, and chief burnout officer of the Breakfast Leadership Network, Michael Levitt.
Welcome back. I've got Alistair Gordon on the line. How are you today?
I'm very well indeed. Thank you, Michael.
I am so glad to have you here. You have an amazing background and you're doing some great work, and we're going to talk about experts and how their time has come. So why don't you share with the audience a little bit about you, and then we'll dive right into the conversation.
Yes, okay, thank you. And thank you so much for the invite. So I've spent about half of my life as a publisher of things called magazines. You might remember, Michael, what they were once upon a time. A lot of those magazines, funnily enough, were IT magazines and, read by, technical experts and their managers. And then my second part of my life really has been about being an executive coach and a leadership development consultant. And then this sort of final 4 or 5 years that we've been working on this thing called expertship, where we've been developing technical experts and helping them be the best experts they can be. And it's kind of full circle, Michael. I feel like I started off working with technical experts and I'm back there again doing, but I think probably helping them far more now than I was then, if that makes sense.
Well, it does, because your experience and the tools that you picked up along the way, you use them now. And of course, you're using the skills that you had when you first started working with those experts, in the early days of your career. And now here we are full circle. And I find that happens a lot in my own personal career. I did a lot of different things, but what I find is I have tools from every one of those experiences and I use them, in my daily life and the things that I do. And I don't even necessarily think about it going, okay, well, I picked this up when I was working in accounting, or I was doing this when I worked in IT, or this was healthcare, or this was nonprofit, or my own business. I don't think about, okay, where did I pick that up? I just know how to use it. I use it.
It's coalesced, hasn't it, really?
It is. So let's dive into experts. And you said in the pre-show where you think their time is finally come. So let's dive into that a little bit, especially around this pandemic and what's been asked and who stepped up, and really made things easier as best you can during a pandemic.
Yeah, well, and I think experts have, and it's really interesting for me. I've spent a lot of my life in corporate life, I guess, working with large organizations of one description or another. And, I think technical experts have been the forgotten group of people, really, who are contributing to the success of a lot of organizations. Organizations spend a lot of money on developing their leaders, and it's always the CEOs or the CFOs that are interviewed, or the chief product officers who are interviewed in magazines and on shows like this and what have you. But if you delve down into some of the core customer value operations of most organizations, the people who are delivering the value, and particularly, Michael, the people who are delivering the innovation, tend to be the technical subject matter experts. And it could be IT, it could be risk, it could be finance, it could be, science, medical, clinical. We've had an enormous number of people on our programs, variety of domains. And most of those people we've discovered have hit kind of a technical ceiling, Michael, where they spend maybe 5 to 10 years of their life acquiring technical knowledge, and superb technical knowledge, by and large, the best of them. And then they kind of flatline a little bit. They end up doing the same sort of work and solving technical problems and what have you, and they don't get really the recognition that they deserve. They're not really as influential as they would like to be. And part of that is that they have spent all this time, getting the technical skills together, and they haven't really developed what we call the enterprise skills. So collaboration, stakeholder engagement, change leadership, business acumen, those sorts of things, that when you layer that on top of the technical stuff, makes them superstars, really changes through. But the pandemic, to your point, people have, pivoted or organizations have pivoted enormously. And the people who've led that pivot has tended to be the technical experts who In the pre-show you mentioned, we've done things in 18 months that they probably thought would take 3 or 4, 5 or 6 years. And they've really stepped up. And I think if you were to do a Google search, I think the word expert has been used more in the last 18 months, I suspect, than the last 18 years beforehand.
So what do you think? I guess I know some of this, but I'm curious your thoughts. What do you think was the tipping point for the experts to really seize the moment and really take this on? Because I have an idea what that is, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because when there's times of challenges and difficult situations, we see, talent rise above all of that and really push things through. So, what were some of the things that you've seen that, really helped these experts really take the reins and make something that was going to roll out in 2030 happen in 2020?
Yeah, I think the question you just asked is worthy of global consideration, really, because I think it's really interesting. I think what I've seen happen is that leadership of large organizations, or small organizations for that matter, when the pandemic hit, they no longer had any of the answers, Michael. They didn't know what to do. They'd never experienced it before, and they did something that's kind of out of habit. And they got their experts together, and in fact, their whole teams together, and said, what do you think we should do? They asked, what do you think we should do? And it was the opportunity finally for the experts to step forward and say, well, I've had this idea for the last 20 years. If you'd listened, we could do this or we could do that or what have you. And I think there's been a senior leadership of a lot of organizations have listened to their experts more closely than ever before. And they've had no choice but to trust them and say, okay, go for it. And I think not in every instance, obviously there's been some train crashes along the way, but in the vast majority of instances, the technical experts have delivered pivot changes that have really one of the key things, working from home, which is, the global phenomenon that's now not going to go away. It was all too difficult for senior leaders. In fact, senior leaders, if you remember, back in, say, February 2020, would not have agreed to have large chunks of their workforce working from home. They wouldn't have agreed. They wouldn't have trusted their employees to do that. And yet all the data now suggests from where you're calling from the US, and also surveys that we've done here in the Asia Pacific and in Asia, suggest productivity's gone up, work-life balance is better, the quality of the work's better. This is something that would not have happened had it not been for COVID. And of course, all of the systems that we're using, whether it's wellness programs from HR or whether it's IT systems that, work really well, like the one we're on right now, all of these have, really morphed very quickly. Remember, the one that we're on at the moment had a massive security issue in March 2020. It was fixed by April 2020, that sort of speed of change. So I think it's people had to find new solutions. Experts had some in their back pockets and stepped up. And of course, that's meant now that leaders, I think, are beginning to look at experts and say, what else could they do? If we gave them a little bit of range to do it.
And that leads to the next point that I want to bring up is, and you mentioned this in some of the information, in researching the work that you do and all of that, is a lot of organizations will onboard or hire new people. They will train them how to do the roles in those organizations. And that's the last time they see the training department. And they're just kind of, good luck and walk away and hope for the best. And it's such a travesty, because there are some levels within organizations where professional development is ongoing. It might be because they're licensed in some type of a role and they need to do that in order to keep their licensing. But many people, don't have those licensing requirements to continue education. But that professional development helps those people get stronger, and it highlights some skills that may have never been discussed. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, I think that's very true. And particularly, I think with technical experts, where a lot of the technical training now can be online, or it still is, very intense books or training programs for coders or scientists or data scientists. And those people tend to hang out in their own tribes, really, Michael, a lot of the time. So a lot of that learning, gets done within the technical department. I think the reason for that phenomenon that you've just described, which is probably there is a small group that gets heavily developed, and that's typically people leaders. So businesses have considered that the secret sauce for corporate success or government success in terms of delivering to the community is having the right people leaders who can inspire their people. I think that's changing. I think people are now seeing that actually it's the people who have the ability to create new value and innovation that are actually also well worth investing in. And, the learning and development departments will not thank me for saying this on your podcast, but they've been complicit because they've loved the leadership piece and what have you, and they haven't really understood technical experts. And a lot of technical experts have, got this unfair reputation of being difficult with people, and better with machines and systems and what have you. So the whole concept has been, right, well, you are high potential, Michael, in this organization, if in the future we can perceive that you will be able to lead large teams of people. You're high potential. If we can't see you leading lots of extra people, then you're low potential. You might be a high performing expert, but you're low potential, and therefore we're not going to put corporate resources into training you in broader set of skills. And that's basically been the strategy for a lot of organizations. There are obviously some very large organizations that all of your listeners will know very well, technical breakthrough companies that have gone completely a different way. The most valuable employees in those companies, in places like Amazon or Facebook or, Microsoft or all of these really, companies that are reinventing our world, are the technical experts, and they have, the same status in seniority as the people leaders and the business leaders. And look at how successful they've been. But they are still, generally speaking, in the minority rather than the majority. But I'm very much hoping that the contribution that experts have made to helping us fight COVID and survive it and hopefully, come out the other side, that will have changed people's view. And certainly in the large organizations that we're working with, a couple of very big global software companies, a few clinical companies, a lot of banks and what have you, I'm absolutely seeing that they're going, wow, we really need to invest in these experts and we need to hang on to them because they just saved us and they're probably going to be creating our future if we treat them properly.
And the retention thing is a huge problem in all types of different sectors. We're seeing in the U.S. Some big problems as far as people finding talent because they just they're going or they're being very specific where they go or they're doing something completely different. And a lot of that had to do with, they learned some things along the way during this pandemic and they realized I've got all these skills and I've got all this talent and this desire to grow and learn. But unfortunately, the environment that I find myself in many of these organizations that are very similar, but unlike, the large corporations that are, investing in their people and doing things differently, they're looking at it's like, what's the point? I might as well just do something else and just go that route. So what's happening is we're seeing, and I speak at HR conferences and all that, and there's the big discussion is, okay, how do we retain people? And they're kind of using, I'll use an old automotive, line from Henry Ford when he was building the cars, and everybody said, we don't need cars, we just need faster horses. And they're the solutions that many, and again, not going to make the HR people happy with me either. We're just irritating everybody today. This is great. The HR people aren't going to be happy with me because they're trying to solve issues with their old tool bags. And it's like, no, this is not going to work. This is a new era that we can actually do things differently. And let's look at that and figure out how do we bring the best out of our talent to utilize the talent that they have that they want to use. And they've been kind of sequestered and saying, no, you stay in your box, you stay in your lane, please. And so many organizations are robbing themselves and their customers of some amazingly dynamically talented individuals that could really grow your organization to the next level.
Yeah, it's so true. And, so many, great insights in that comment, because first and foremost, I mean, we are upsetting, the senior leaders and HR, but in fairness to them, experts are pretty good at hiding their light under the bushel, in some ways, where, we've worked with a lot of, 2,500 experts in the last 3 or 4 years. And I would say 80% of them are, pretty introverted, Michael. And I'd say 95% of them are not very good at describing what they do to non-technical people. And 98% of them get pretty intolerant of people who don't have the same technical understanding as they do. So, you add all of these things together and they come across as somewhat difficult and prickly to deal with. Whereas actually that's not, it's not the case. What it is they're different. They think differently and they add value differently. So, of course, when you suddenly give them, and as a consequence of this sort of slightly difficult, your back room, stay in your lane, as you described, or get back in your box, as so true. Typically, if you go and have a look at where the IT department is in large organizations' buildings, it's buried somewhere behind, a lot of blast doors, and they're not allowed out. So now we have introverts who, like working autonomously and do some of their best work autonomously, by the way, because they need to really concentrate on what they're doing. And they hate interruptions, and they hate, actually, the office environment is not necessarily the perfect environment for them to do their great work. And now they've discovered they can be, based in Wanaka in New Zealand, one of the most beautiful places in the world, and be, having a software conference with Michael in New York, no problem. They don't, now we've separated capability from location. There is this dislocation that's going on. I think, that's some of what you hear about with the great resignation. That's sort of a really buzzword around HR circles at the moment. My sense is that a lot of that's pent up demand, but some of it is also places like where I'm calling from, Australia, where our borders are closed. And so global talent can't get in. So suddenly the talent that is here is worth, 30% more than it was a year ago. And so there's a few things I think going on. But certainly companies need to think differently now about even identifying who their talent are, Michael, because, one of the big challenges is you can probably identify who a good people leader in the future might be because, they have good people skills and they get on with people and they seem to get things done and they run high performance teams. They're a bit more visible, but a high performance expert, an expert who's got enormous potential, much more difficult for the HR folks to really identify. And in fact, that high potential expert might even be misbehaving a little bit. They're a bit tough in meetings, they're intolerant of people. So, HR folks will think, well, they're not living the values. They're not being a nice person to other people. They're not playing well with the other children. So clearly they don't have potential. Actually, what might be the case is they're not playing well with the other children because they're intensely frustrated about the additional value they could add if they were given the opportunity. And obviously that's our big hope as we started the podcast conversation, is that now people are looking at experts differently and saying maybe we do need to open up and give them the opportunity to run at their ideas because they seem to be pretty capable of executing under pressure.
One of my favorite bosses, and this goes back 21 years ago, now almost 22 years ago, was with a startup organization at the time. Now they're a global organization, Internet Market Research. And I remember at 3:32 p.m. on my first day, I remember the time, he came to my cubicle and he said, okay, we're going to lay down some ground rules around working here. And I'm thinking, oh boy, here we go. Here it comes. And he leans in and he says, I don't care when you get here. I don't care when you leave. As long as you get your job done, everything's good. you let me know whatever you need, whatever you're interested. If you have ideas, suggestions, anything that you think would make things easier for you or the colleagues, by all means, I'm a pager call away. We still had pagers back then. That was before the iPhone. We all had BlackBerry or RIM pagers and all that kind of good stuff. So, but I sat back in my cubicle after that, and I just kind of reflected on that, going, if I'm ever in leadership, I am totally stealing that method, because that's what I've done. And anybody that I've led, it's like, what do you need to do your job? I'm going to make sure you have that. And then I'm going to get out of your way, because it's your role. But be the eyes and ears. If something comes up, suggest it. There's no, there might be some crazy ideas, but we're going to at least look at it and see if it makes sense or not. And creating that nurturing environment for people that want to grow and learn and do things just improves every aspect of your business.
Yes, and that you're quite right to steal that approach, and of course you'd be sitting there inspired to think, right, I want to think of a great idea. I want to add value. I want to make a difference. The problem is that, as you will have probably experienced in potentially the rest of your life, these people are few and far between, and there's no surprise, of course, that startup has gone global, because with that sort of approach, they're leveraging and would be attracting technical talent like no tomorrow. I mean, Michael, the reason that we wrote the book, which is I think why we came to know one another, is because those managers aren't, there may be 1 in 10 will approach you like that. I mean, I think in technical startups, IT startups, that's much more prevalent. But most technical experts work in large corporations that are still a long way away from that culture. And because the leaders don't think like that, it means that the experts have to do things differently. They have to, step up. They have to be better at articulating their value proposition. They have to be better at making a good business case for funds to, build a new program or a new system or a new product. They have to be better at collaborating with people from other craft groups, other domain groups. They need to understand that when they make a change to a system, that doesn't mean the change has happened. They have to go and talk to the folks who are using the change and persuade them to use the new functionality. They need to be much broader, and most particularly, they've got to stop asking the business what they want. I regularly talk to IT teams, and I asked the IT team, so how do you know what the business wants you to do for them? And their typical answer, Michael, is, well, we go and ask the business. And say, okay, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you know what IT could do for this business? And they go, well, 9, 10, 11. There's always one that says 11. And on a scale of 1 to 10, how do the non-IT people in this business know, how much IT could do for the business, and particularly the senior leaders? And typically the IT team roll their eyes and laugh and say they can't even operate their mobile phone properly, maybe 1 or 2. So let me get this right. What IT could do for this business, and you're going and asking the people who have no idea, no clue really of the crazy things you could do. You're asking the wrong question of those people. What you should be asking is what keeps them awake at night. What are the customers buying and why? What are the customers going to want in 2 years' time and why? Which competitors are growing faster than us and why? You need to be getting that intelligence and then bringing it back and going, how can we help solve that problem? And then suddenly you've gone from being a technical expert to be what we call a master expert, which is the name of the book, of someone who's really adding value. And, I wish every technical expert had your experience with that leader. But most don't, so they've got to make it happen.
Yeah, many of us that don't get leaders like that, if we're bullheaded enough, I guess is one way to put it, we'll figure out a way to do it ourselves and be our own leader to grow and do the things we need to do. So I've loved this conversation. I'm going to talk to you for hours on this, but our listeners, their attention span keeps getting shorter and shorter. So the format of my show seems to work with audiences as far as people listening the whole way through. So where can people find out more about you, the book, and everything else you do?
Yeah, so our website, our company name is Expertunity, which is expert and unity, and it's .global, which is what we're hoping to be. The book is Master Expert. You'll find it, on all of the main book buying platforms. If any of your listeners know a technical expert who's stuck, or indeed they are one who's stuck, it's the perfect Christmas present, Michael. Plus, on that website, there's lots of free resources. You can download all sorts of chapters for free and what have you. So encourage technical experts to sort of, step up and make the difference they know they can. And anyone who knows one who's a bit stuck, help them out. Thank you so much for the invite, Michael. Really love talking to you.
No, thank you. And I'll definitely have all that information in the show notes. So again, thank you for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Breakfast Leadership Show, part of the Breakfast Leadership Network. Visit breakfastleadership.com for tips on empowering your business and your life.